Election issues are always top of mind during legislative sessions, and we see lots of bills introduced. They're among the most controversial pieces of legislation. We had hoped to have a discussion today from both sides of the aisle. We reached out to several Republicans who were unable to make it. We will have them on an upcoming show to talk about the topic. Joining me now is Democratic Representative Saira Draper of Atlanta, who is Minority Caucus Chief Deputy Whip. Her House committees include Budget and Fiscal Affairs, Oversight, Judiciary, I should say, and Juvenile. Welcome to Lawmakers for the 2026 session.
I'm
it's the first
so
time
happy
having.
to be here.
Thank you for being here. You recently wrote in a newsletter about what you call the most important election issue that no one is talking about. You were referring to SB 189 that passed in 2024 that requires the state to phase out the use of QR codes by July 1st of this year.
That's right.
It passed along party lines. You voted against it. Tell us more about it.
Well, I voted against the bill as a whole. That was
Okay.
one portion of the bill, a very small portion of the bill, but it was a portion of the bill that required time to address because our current voting system uses QR codes. If you ever go vote in person, you vote on a touch screen, you make your selections, and then a ballot gets printed out. And there is a QR code on that ballot that has your selections. But there are folks in Georgia that had concerns about that. They said, I can't read the QR code. I don't actually know what's embedded in that QR code. So how do I know that who I wanted to vote for is actually reflected in that QR code? And so the legislature listened to that and they said, okay, we'll get rid of the QR code. But that's only the first step. We have to figure out the how as well.
Okay, so you were the only Democrat on a blue ribbon study committee over the last few months on election procedures. The report was released yesterday. And I want to point out that we invited the chair of the committee, Republican Representative Tim Fleming, to come on the show, but he was unable to make it. He has agreed to come on in the future. But among the recommendations is to extend the committee to the end of December of this year. So
Yes.
Tell us about that and why.
Well, I think there's a lot of issues that we have to grapple with when it comes to elections. The system that we are currently using is coming to a contractual end. We can either choose to renew it or we can move into a different direction. I know there's a lot of folks that want us to move into a different direction. And let me just say, being on the Blue Ribbon Committee, we went to several places. We traveled all over Georgia this year because we wanted to go to the people and we wanted the people to tell us, what do you want out of your elections? It was such a privilege to get that feedback. And we are taking that feedback and it's part of our recommendations. But I think the thing about election issues is you have to hear from all the stakeholders. You have to hear from the voters. You have to hear from the counties who actually administer the elections. And you have to take all that information and then you have to execute. You have to execute a system that works for as many people as possible. So it's a long-term process. It's more than what we can do in a 40-day legislative session. So I'm so pleased that we're extending the committee to do that work and to do it well, because that's what's so important.
December 31st, so we'll hear more about that.
Yes.
Now, another recommendation from the committee is to adopt legislation to, quote, provide voters with the option to utilize pre-printed hand-marked paper ballots on Election Day, beginning with the 2026 general election. The legislation should require all ballots that contain a QR code of any kind to be hand-counted for the purposes of official tabulation. What are your thoughts on this?
So that is the recommendation that the committee made to address the QR code issue that you opened the segment with. This would be a solution to the QR code issue that we are trying to resolve this session before July. I will say in the report, I was opposed to recommendation number 2. I just don't think there's enough time before the November 2026 election to make such a major change in how we run elections. And I think it's a tricky issue. I think we as a committee are still kind of trying to figure out what is the best approach to the QR code issue, whether it's what's in the report or maybe we make a different kind of shift in a different direction. I think as a committee, we are still trying to figure that out. So more to come on that one.
And can you tell us whether we will see QR codes in November?
Well, look, I mean, the law says we have to phase them out by July 2026. So unless we rescind that law, that is an option. We could rescind that law, we could delay that law, or we can come up with another solution. My hope is that whatever solution we come up with is a responsible solution that doesn't throw the 2026 elections into disarray.
Okay. Do you think the hand-marked paper ballot system is the best route?
Look, I actually am pretty agnostic as to what kind of system we use, whether it's with the machines that we have now or hand-marked paper ballots. There's pros and cons to both methods, as there are to many things. What's most important to me is that whatever system we use has great processes and works for Georgia voters.
Okay. What concerns do you have about the upcoming elections for statewide seats and the midterms overall?
Well, this is an opportunity to pivot to what happened in Fulton County last week, because what happened in Fulton County, I think one of the worst things we can do is minimize the threat that it poses. The state has the election administration function. Georgians have been, and folks in the legislature, I've been in the legislature where folks on both sides of the aisle have been saying we don't want outside interference with our election. This is an attempt to involve the federal government in what should be a state function. And I don't care what you are, Democrat, Republican, Independent, we should not want the federal government inserting themselves into our election. But that is exactly what is happening. And the threat is being made by President Trump that, he wants to nationalize our elections. And that makes our elections less secure, less safe, and it's something that we should all be pushing back against.
I noticed that you went down there. I saw you in some video. Yeah, so you were there when it was all taking place with the FBI raid. What were your thoughts about what was happening at the time?
Many different thoughts. It's incredibly undemocratic what happened, but I think the main thought was this isn't about 2020. So the warrant that was executed on said they wanted all the materials about the 2020 election from Fulton County. But anybody who follows the evidence, anybody who follows the facts knows that the Georgia election in 2020 was the most scrutinized election of all elections. We had recounts, we had audits, we had a independent performance review of Fulton County. There were almost 60 court cases that challenged the election results here, all that failed. So if you're looking at the evidence, there is no question that there was no systemic voter fraud in Georgia and that President Trump did not win Georgia in 2020. So what was going through my mind when I was there was this is not about 2020. This is about undermining the 2026 election. Because if you think you are going to win the 2026 election and your party is going to win the 2026 election, you don't want to undermine the results because that goes against your credibility. But if you're afraid of losing, you start laying the foundation now to sow doubt.
Okay. Well, we'll hear more about this. We're only on day 11, so thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.